Randy completes a wire transfer for $200 million. He brags to his associates about hiring a general who is hard to come by. At the same time, Adley stands motionless in the shadows, her dark hair in practical Dutch braids, and her navy satin trench coat, hiding a matte tactical bodysuit. The atmosphere shifts instantly from celebration to terror as the status completed alert flashes, and Adley draws her custom silenced weapon. The first minute establishes that Adley is a battle-tested talent, forged in real combat, a physical anomaly who doesn't fear death. The setting moves rapidly from the boardroom to the gritty mountain drug factory, setting the stage for a relentless pursuit. Before we continue with the story, do us a favor by subscribing to our channel. It helps us keep going. The heavy iron hood was ripped from Adley's head, and for a moment, the opulent gold leafing of Randy's private sanctuary was a blinding blur. As her vision cleared, she didn't blink or squint. Her piercing, unshakable gaze immediately locked onto the man sitting behind the mahogany desk. Randy, a heavy-set figure draped in the expensive silk of a modern tycoon, leaned forward, his rings catching the light as he toyed with a crystal glass of amber liquid. Around him stood the Zero Squad, a collection of broad-shouldered mercenaries who wore their arrogance like armor. "She's a woman," one of the guards snorted, a jagged scar running through his eyebrow. He stepped closer to Adley, his shadow falling over her navy satin trench coat. "Randy, you paid $200 million for a girl who looks like she just stepped off a runway? I've seen tougher threats in a high school yard." Adley remained motionless, her breath a slow, rhythmic oceanic pulse that defied the adrenaline-soaked air of the room. Her dark hair, pulled into tight, practical Dutch braids, didn't have a single strand out of place. She didn't offer a rebuttal or a plea. She simply looked through the guard, her high cheekbones casting sharp shadows that made her face appear more like a sculpted weapon than human flesh. Randy watched her, his own amusement fading into a strange, cold discomfort. He had bought and sold lives for decades, but the woman standing in front of him possessed a barometric pressure that made the oxygen in the room feel thin. "Troops are easy to find," Randy murmured, his voice cutting through the guard's mocking laughter. "But a general is hard to come by." He slid a tablet across the desk, the orange glow of the $200 million transaction still flickering on the screen. "The Zero Squad thinks you're a liability, Adley. They think I've wasted my fortune on a ghost." Adley finally spoke, her voice a low, clinical baritone that silenced the room. "A ghost is only a liability to those who are already dead. You didn't pay for my beauty, Randy. You paid for the fact that when I'm done, no one will be left to tell you how I did it." The transition from the velvet-lined boardroom to the jagged, fog-choked peaks of the mountain camp was as abrupt as the click of a safety being disengaged. Adley moved through the dense underbrush with the silent, predatory grace of a ghost, her navy trench coat a dark smudge against the gray stone and twisting pines. The camp was a sprawling scar on the landscape, a chaotic cluster of corrugated metal shacks and heavy-duty generators humming with the rhythm of illicit industry. This was Ernest's domain, a fortress built on paranoia and the smell of chemical rot. As Adley approached the perimeter, she didn't hide. She walked directly into the center of the camp, her cold, clinical expression acting as a shield that stopped the armed sentries in their tracks. They saw the beauty prisoner they had been told to expect, but something in her unshakable gaze made them hesitate to raise their rifles. In the center of the clearing, tied to rusted iron pillars beneath a sagging tarp, were Swift and Yvonne. Swift's face was a map of bruises, his eyes defiant even as he struggled against his bonds. Beside him, Yvonne was trembling, her expensive clothes stained with mountain red clay. Between them sat a battered steel briefcase, the container for the blue ice formula. Adley came to a halt, her presence cooling the humid air. She scanned the scene, her tactical mind instantly processing the power dynamic. Ernest's men were circling like vultures, but they were keeping a precise distance from the captives. "You're the one Randy sent," Swift spat, his voice raspy from dehydration. He looked at Adley, searching for a flicker of mercy, and finding only a terrifying void. "You're here for the formula." Adley didn't answer him immediately. She looked at the briefcase, then at the terrified Yvonne. She realized in an instant that the formula wasn't just a commodity, it was their only shield. The second that briefcase was opened and the contents verified, the lives of the two people in front of her would become an unnecessary expense. She leaned in close to Swift, her voice a low, lethal whisper. "I'm here for the danger, Swift. And right now, the only thing keeping your heart beating is that box. Don't let them open it." The silence of the mountain pass was shattered by the rhythmic grinding of gears as the heavy shipment trucks labored up the steep incline. Adley sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, her gloved hands resting loosely on her lap, though her mind was operating with the precision of a thermal scanner. Beside her, the driver was sweating, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He knew the value of the blue ice precursors in the back, and he knew the reputation of the rival gang that claimed these heights. The ambush was textbook. A fallen timber blocked the narrow road, and within seconds, 3 blacked-out SUVs roared from the tree line, boxing the convoy in. Armed men spilled out, their faces masked, shouting orders that were quickly drowned out by the cocking of automatic rifles. They moved with the frantic energy of street thugs who had stumbled upon a gold mine. Adley didn't wait for Randy's men to react. She slipped from the cab before the truck had even fully grown to a halt. In the dim, filtered light of the canopy, her navy trench coat made her look like a shifting shadow. She didn't reach for her suppressed handgun. Instead, a flick of her wrist sent 2 tri-edged bayonets sliding into her palms, specialized blades designed for internal devastation and surgical silence. She moved through the rival gang like a cold front. The first man didn't even see her. He only felt the hot, clinical bite of the steel beneath his ribs. She spun, a blur of satin and lethal intent, her Dutch braids whipping through the air as she redirected a shotgun barrel and drove her second blade into the attacker's collarbone. There was no wasted motion, no dramatic flare, only the rhythmic, wet thud of steel meeting flesh. By the time the smoke cleared, 6 men lay in the dirt, the unique, triangular puncture wounds acting as a grim calling card. Adley wiped a single drop of blood from her blade onto a fallen leaf and looked toward the horizon. She knew that when Captain Andy and his task force arrived to process the scene, those specific wounds would tell them exactly who had been there. The general had left her signature, and the hunt was officially on. The scent of ozone and wet earth hung heavy over the camp as Adley stepped back into the flickering light of the holding area. Behind her, the bodies of the rival gang had already been swallowed by the mountain mist, but the violence had done nothing to dampen the tension vibrating from Randy's latest directive. The comms unit in her ear crackled with Randy's voice, thin, greedy, and impatient. The order was clear. The time for subtlety had passed. He wanted the blue ice formula, and he wanted Adley to break Swift to get it. Adley approached the rusted pillar where Swift remained bound. She didn't bring tools of torture. She brought only a chair, which she placed directly in his line of sight. She sat with a terrifying, statuesque stillness, her navy trench coat draped perfectly, her clinical gaze tracing the pulse point in Swift's neck. For a long time, she said nothing, letting the sounds of the predatory mountain night crawl under his skin. "Your father held on to his secrets until the air left his lungs," Adley finally said, her voice a calm, low vibration that seemed to bypass Swift's ears and strike his nerves. He thought silence was a shield. He was wrong. It was just an invitation for men like Ernest to take everything else he loved. Swift's jaw tightened, his knuckles turning white against the ropes. "You don't know anything about him," he hissed, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Adley leaned forward, the orange light of a distant barrel fire reflecting in her unshakable eyes. She didn't look like a woman hired for money. She looked like an inevitable consequence. "I know you're stubborn like he was. You think holding that formula is your power. But Randy doesn't pay $200 million for a formula he has to wait for. He pays for the result." She reached out, her gloved fingers tracing the steel briefcase beside him with a feather-light touch that carried the weight of a death sentence. Every minute you stay silent, Yvonne's life becomes a rounded-off error in a tycoon's ledger. You're not protecting the formula, Swift. You're just making sure there's no one left to remember why you kept it. The heavy, humid air of the mountain camp suddenly curdled with the distant, rhythmic thrum of rotors. Adley's head snapped toward the tree-line, her clinical focus shifting instantly from Swift's stubborn defiance to the tactical reality of the horizon. Blue and red strobes flickered through the dense fog, ghost-like and encroaching. Captain Andy's task force hadn't just found the camp. They had surrounded it with the silent, suffocating precision of a closing trap. Chaos erupted in the clearing. Ernest's men scrambled for their weapons, shouting panicked orders as the first flashbangs detonated at the perimeter, turning the world into a blinding, white-hot roar. Through the smoke, the silhouettes of tactical teams moved like shadows, their laser sights cutting through the haze. Adley stood in the center of the storm, her navy trench coat billowing as she remained the only still point in a collapsing universe. She looked at Swift and Yvonne, then at the steel briefcase containing the blue ice formula. Her comms unit hissed with Randy's frantic voice, demanding she secure the asset and eliminate the witnesses before the police breached the inner circle. It was the moment of tactical truth. To take the briefcase meant engaging a federal task force and risking the $200 million payout. To leave it meant losing her leverage over the man who had bought her life. Adley's hand went to her suppressed handgun, her finger resting against the cold trigger guard. She watched as Captain Andy's lead squad breached the eastern gate, their focus pinned on the armed mercenaries. A calculated, lethal thought crossed her mind. The police weren't just an obstacle. They were a high-velocity distraction. If she played the beauty prisoner for just a few seconds longer, she could lure the task force into a direct confrontation with Ernest's elite guards, using the ensuing bloodbath to vanish into the mountain trails. She didn't reach for the formula. Instead, she drew a small, tactical flare from her holster. With a clinical flick of her wrist, she ignited it, bathing the captives in a harsh, crimson light that drew every police rifle in the vicinity toward the center of the camp. As the first volley of gunfire erupted between the law and the Mafia, Adley stepped backward into the shadows, her unshakable gaze fixed on the forest path. The mission had changed. Survival was now the only currency that mattered. The crimson flare Adley ignited had turned the mountain fog into a visceral, pulsing haze of blood-red light. As the first wave of Captain Andy's tactical team breached the inner perimeter, the camp transformed into a chaotic symphony of high-velocity lead and shattered glass. But the true betrayal didn't come from the police. From the shadows of the command shack, Ramson emerged, her usual cold composure replaced by a look of jagged, searing hatred. She didn't raise her weapon toward the police or Adley. She aimed it directly at the back of Ernest's head. "My father didn't die for your formula, Ernest." Ramson's voice tore through the thunder of the flashbangs, raw and trembling with years of suppressed grief. "He died because you were too greedy to let a partner live. I didn't come here to manage your shipments. I came to watch your empire burn." Before Ernest could turn his heavy frame, Ramson squeezed the trigger. The shot missed his skull by an inch as a police projectile shattered the railing beside her, sending the camp into a three-way slaughter. It was no longer a tactical raid. It was a blood feud. Ernest's personal guards, the Zero Squad, opened fire indiscriminately, caught between the advancing police line and the traitor in their own ranks. Adley watched the collapse with the detached precision of a predator. She saw Andy's men pinned down by heavy machine gun fire from the shacks, while Ramson and Ernest's loyalists tore each other apart in the center of the clearing. This wasn't her war, but she was the only one moving with purpose through the crossfire. She dove behind a stack of chemical crates, the bullets shredding the wood inches above her Dutch braids. Her suppressed handgun found its rhythm, clearing a path through the mercenaries who stood between her and the extraction point. She didn't look back at the carnage. To Adley, the blood on the ground was just another variable in the equation of her survival. Ramson's vengeance had provided the perfect curtain of smoke, And as the camp erupted in one final, deafening explosion, thorns slipped into the darkness, leaving the ghosts of the past to finish what they had started. The air inside the vault's sublevel was thick with the scent of ozone and chilled nitrogen, a sterile sanctuary away from the blood feuds screaming through the camp above. Adley moved with a ghost's precision, her boots making no sound on the polished steel floor. Before her stood the central pedestal containing the finalized blue ice formula, the digital key to Randy's empire. As she reached for the drive, the comms unit in her ear crackled, but it wasn't Randy's voice. It was a cold, rhythmic sequence of tones. A kill switch. Adley's unshakable gaze shifted toward the security monitors. The Zero Squad, mercenaries, the same men who had mocked her in the boardroom, weren't engaging the police or Ernest's men. They were fanning out across the vault's exits, their heavy rifles leveled at the only person inside. In that moment, the $200 million transaction reveal flashed in her mind. The orange glow of status completed. Randy had never intended to pay her. He had simply used the money to bait his most dangerous asset into a locked room before cutting the cord. Target sighted. A voice rasped over the vault's intercom. Randy says the general's pension is too expensive. Close the doors. The heavy hydraulic gates began to hiss shut, a tomb of reinforced titanium sealing her in. The mercenaries moved with the confidence of men who thought they were flushing out a cornered animal. But Adley didn't panic. Her heart rate remained a predatory 40 BPM. She adjusted the leather shoulder holster beneath her navy trench coat and drew her custom tactical handgun, the laser module painting a thin, lethal red line across the closing gap of the door. Randy had made a fundamental mistake. He believed that because he had bought Thorn, he owned the danger she represented. He had paid for a general, but he had forgotten that a general knows how to turn an ambush into a massacre. As the first mercenary breached the threshold, Adley's clinical expression didn't change. She didn't fear death. She simply prepared to distribute it. The transaction was no longer about money. It was about survival, and the price of her silence had just gone up. The hydraulic gates of the vault hadn't even fully settled into their tracks before the first flash of gunfire lit the sublevel. Adley didn't retreat. She surged forward, a blur of navy satin and lethal efficiency. She breached the mercenary line with a series of rhythmic, silenced shots that dropped the Zero Squad's point men before they could register her movement. Emerging from the industrial complex into the freezing mountain air, she found the camp in its final death throes. Through the smoke of burning chemical drums, she spotted her exit, a dark green SUV idling near the north perimeter, its engine a low, hungry growl. She moved toward it as a shadow among shadows. The driver, a panicked loyalist of Ernest's, didn't even feel the door open. A single, clinical strike to his temple sent him sprawling into the dirt, and Adley slid behind the wheel. She slammed the vehicle into gear just as Captain Andy's tactical units and Randy's remaining mercenaries converged on her position. The SUV roared to life, tearing through a chain-link fence and onto the narrow, winding access road that led down the mountain. Behind her, a swarm of headlights flickered into existence, a high-stakes procession of law and betrayal. The chase was a symphony of screeching tires and shattering glass. Adley drove with a terrifying, superhuman focus, her heart rate remaining a steady, predatory hum even as bullets riddled the rear windshield. She pushed the vehicle through the neon-soaked outskirts of the city, weaving through midnight traffic with surgical precision, before veering sharply back toward the rugged, unmapped trails of the high country. The mercenaries were aggressive, attempting to ram her off the jagged cliffs, while the police sirens wailed in a desperate attempt to keep pace. Adley looked into the rearview mirror, her unshakable gaze fixed on the pursuing lights. She wasn't fleeing. She was leading them into the wilderness, into the domain of the ghost. As she hit the first stretch of dirt and gravel, she felt the general within her take total control. The mountain was no longer a cage. It was a gauntlet, and she was the only one who knew the way out. The dark green SUV skidded to a halt at the precipice of the manufacturing camp, its frame riddled with bullet holes, its engine still humming defiantly. Adley stepped out into the freezing mountain air, her navy trench coat shredded at the hem, yet her clinical expression remained as smooth as glass. Behind her, the lights of Captain Andy's task force and the remnants of Randy's Zero Squad were a distant, frantic constellation of blue and red. She didn't hesitate. Adley moved back into the heart of the factory one last time, not as a hired gun, but as an architect of total erasure. With a series of precise, practiced movements, she overrode the pressure valves on the nitrogen cooling system and set a thermal charge against the central chemical vats. The blue ice formula, now secured in a drive tucked into her bodysuit, was no longer Randy's leverage, it was her insurance. As she triggered the final sequence, Adley pulled a secondary device from her pocket. With a single click, she uploaded the internal security footage and the $200 million transaction logs directly to every major news outlet and federal server. The evidence of Randy's entertainment empire laundering blood money for international cartels began its unstoppable crawl across the global web. The tycoon wouldn't just be broke. He would be a pariah, his reputation incinerated before the first explosion even shook the mountain. A deafening roar consumed the facility, a pillar of white-hot fire erupting into the night sky, turning the blue ice and the evidence of her past into ash. Adley didn't look back at the inferno. She walked away from the heat, her silhouette thinning as she merged with the jagged shadows of the unmapped trails. She was no longer Maya, and she was no longer Thorn, the asset. She was a hunted legend, an independent force of nature disappearing into the dark with a fortune in her accounts and a deadly secret in her hand. Behind her, the world burned. Ahead, there was only the cold, beautiful silence of freedom.